All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to crack up in the science of why a good story is just so irresistible. We're going to look at how our brains are literally hardwired for a good narrative and how writers can tap into that science to create stories that you just can't put down.
Have you ever been there? You tell yourself, okay, just one more chapter. And the next thing you know, the sun is coming up, you knew you had to get up early, so why did you keep reading? What is that magnetic force that makes a great story feel, more important than sleep? Well, the answer actually has very little to do with willpower. You didn't really decide to keep reading, it was more like a biological imperative. The power a story has over you isn't some willing suspension of disbelief, because that implies you have a choice. Turns out, you don't. Nature, quite literally, makes you pay attention.
So that begs the question, right? Why would evolution wire us this way? Because for this to stick around, getting lost in a story must have given us some kind of huge survival advantage. I mean, otherwise, getting distracted from, say, a saber-toothed tiger lurking in the bushes would have been a very bad evolutionary idea.
And the reason is actually pretty simple. Story was the original virtual reality. It lets us vicariously try on these difficult, dangerous, or super complex situations, all from the safety of our couch. It's a training ground. It lets us practice for a future we can't possibly predict and learn what we might need to do to survive it.
So how does this brain hack actually work on a chemical level? Well, a really effective story sparks intense curiosity, and that triggers a flood of dopamine in your brain. That feeling of pleasure, that's a chemical reward from nature for paying attention, because you might just learn something life or death important. In fact, fMRI scans show that our brains don't just observe a story, they light up as if we are right there, participating in the events ourselves.
But, and this is a big but, for all you writers out there, here's the catch. While our brains are expert story consumers, we are not naturally expert story creators. And that needs to probably be the single biggest mistake that most writers make. The amazing writer Flannery O'Connor just completely nailed it with this quote. As readers, we feel what a story is deep in our bones, but when we try to build one from scratch, we often end up focusing on all the wrong things.
We make the classic mistake of confusing the plot, the sequence of what happens, for the story itself. But the plot, that's just the surface level stuff. What our brain is actually hunting for, what it craves, is the story, the internal meaning, the emotional struggle, the way the main character fundamentally changes. That's the real survival information we're wired to look for.
Think of it this way. You can have the most beautiful, elegant writing and a plot that's packed with explosions and car chases. But if it isn't powered by that internal story, it's basically a gorgeous lamp with no electricity. It looks the part, but it's cold, it's lifeless, and it's not going to give the reader that dopamine hit they're biologically craving. So where does that electricity come from? The book, Story Genius, gives it a name, the third rail. It's the invisible, high-voltage power source that makes a novel come alive. The third rail is that very specific, constant internal conflict that your protagonist is wrestling with. It's the live wire, and every single event in your plot has to touch that wire to have any real emotional punch. Without it, the train of your plot just sits on the tracks, going absolutely nowhere. And here is the key that unlocks absolutely everything. This internal struggle, this third rail, it doesn't just appear on page 1. It's a pre-existing condition. It is the emotional baggage your character brings with them into the novel, often from something that happened years or even decades before the plot ever kicks off. So this third rail is forged from two elements inside your protagonist that are completely at war with each other. First, there's a deep-seated desire, that one thing they have always wanted more than anything in the world. And fighting against that is a core misbelief about how the world works, a fear, really, that makes achieving that desire feel totally impossible. And this creates the character's real and truly impossible goal. They desperately try to get what they want without ever having to confront that deeply ingrained fear. This internal contradiction, wanting something but being terrified of what it takes to get it, that is the true engine of conflict that will power your entire novel.
Okay, so as a writer, how do you actually build a novel around this powerful core? You don't start with a plot outline. You start by building what's called a story blueprint, and you build it from the inside out.
The mantra is so simple, but it's revolutionary for most writers. Story first, plot second. You have to understand your character's internal third rail before you can even begin to design a plot that's going to challenge it in a meaningful way.
Now, a story blueprint is not just a list of things that happen. Not at all. It's a cause and effect map. It traces exactly how each external event is precision engineered to trigger the protagonist's internal struggle, ultimately forcing them to confront their misbelief and hopefully change.
Okay, let's make this super practical. If you're a writer, maybe grab a pen. First, define your character's lifelong desire. And be specific. What is it? Second, define the misbelief that's holding them back. What are they terrified will happen if they really go after that desire? And third, brainstorm a plot problem, some external event that makes it impossible for them to get what they want and hold on to their misbelief at the same time. One of them has to break. And right there, that's your story.
You know, when we really start to understand this, we realize that stories are doing something way more profound for us than just keeping us entertained. And this brings us to the big takeaway, really. We're not using stories to escape our lives. We're using them as a decoder ring, a flight simulator for life, to try and figure out how to live our own lives better. We're searching for inside information on how to navigate the incredibly complex social world that we all share. This whole approach we've been talking about is grounded in the absolutely brilliant work of Lisa Cron in her book, Story Genius. Seriously, if you're a writer, or even just fascinated by why stories have such a hold on us, I cannot recommend it enough. And that leaves us with one final, kind of provocative thought. If every great story is about the tension between a deep desire and a core misbelief, and we use these stories to navigate reality, then what's the third rail that's driving your life story? What's the desire and the misbelief that defines your own internal conflict? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.